Earlier this year, I had observed that my mother's breathing had become very difficult. So I asked the care manager to contact the GP, and the GP sent my mother directly into hospital. Initially, when she was being dealt with, my mother had really good relationship with a young doctor. He treated her as an individual who was best person to talk about how she felt and what was going on. But he was also very respectful to me as her carer. When she went to the ward, during that day, one of the junior doctors came and asked the same questions again, and my mother was still a little confused. I followed her out and said, "You do realise that my mother has dementia, and therefore some of the answers are not secure." And her response to me was, "There's nothing wrong with your mother's memory," and walked off. And what made it worse was, on the second day my mother was in hospital, I was sitting in the corridor waiting, and on the wall in front of me there was a poster. And the poster told me that this was a dementia-friendly ward. After 4 days, it felt fairly suddenly. We were told that my mother would be leaving the hospital. This actually distressed my mother quite a bit. It was a sudden change that she was now going home. When the ambulance service arrived, we were kept waiting, and the ambulance people, there were two, said, "I'm sorry, we can't go because a particular form hadn't been filled in." A form did come, and they were able to take my mother home. I asked the staff at the residential home for a copy of the discharge and discovered that it wasn't completed. My mother was sent home with an open wound in her side and a cannula still left in her arm, which a member of staff at the residential home, who was not trained to do so, had to remove. And they had no information at all as to how they should handle this open wound. There is a breakdown in communication, and the way one is left feeling is that different parts of the same service have different agendas. My mother has been on pain medication because of 2 vertebrae crumbling in her spine, which she obviously experiences as very painful. And for whatever reason, she was taken off this medication while she was in hospital. I'm sure there was a good reason. The difficulty was she wasn't put on anything else. So there seems to be a lack of a communication process that keeps the patient in focus. And then beyond that, as a carer, I would also hope and indeed expect that I would be kept informed too. She doesn't want to go back into hospital. She was more confused, more distressed when she returned. Now, obviously, some of that comes from the change anyway, but this was more than that. These are small things that could be put right with some thought and some further coordination. If I wasn't here to speak on behalf of my mother, who would speak for her? And there are people in the community who have no one to speak for them. And so to some degree, I'm not just speaking of my mother, I'm speaking of a lot of vulnerable people.